They say small towns are peaceful. They lied. Welcome to Millbrook County, Maine, a place where the past isn't just history, it's a predator. My name is Michael Thorne, a detective seeking to disappear. But I found myself living by 3 strange rules, just to survive the secrets buried beneath the quiet surface. What's the creepiest small town you've ever visited? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to ride shotgun with me, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because in Millbrook, history doesn't just repeat itself. It demands an audience. The patrol begins now. Highway 666 wasn't a road. It was a rumor whispered in exhaust fumes and a silence that swallowed sound whole. It stretched across the Nevada pan, a ribbon of cracked, sun-blistered asphalt cutting through a landscape that God had clearly forgotten, or perhaps actively cursed. By day, it shimmered under a heat that could boil the marrow in your bones. By night, it was an ink-black void where the stars felt too close, too cold, like chips of celestial ice. And somewhere along its loneliest stretch, a smear of faded neon against the infinite dark, pulsed the Dead Mile Diner, my new sanctuary, my new prison. Cal Weaver. That's who I was trying to be. The real me, the one whose name was probably still echoing in police scanners back in California, was buried under layers of debt, cheap whiskey, and the crushing weight of a single, catastrophic night. A night of rain, twisted metal, and a life extinguished because I'd been too reckless, too full of myself. I hadn't stayed. I'd run, leaving behind wreckage both metal and human. Now, the only race I was running was against my own ghosts, and they had a hell of a head start. The Dead Mile Diner, with its graveyard shift and its promise of no questions asked, felt less like an opportunity, and more like the last, grimy station before the end of the line. The diner itself was a long silver bullet of a building, probably gleaming once, now dulled by decades of desert wind and sun. Inside, the air was a potent cocktail, stale coffee, the persistent ghost of fried onions, and an undercurrent of something else, a cloying, almost artificial sweetness, like burnt sugar and old, unexpressed grief. The red vinyl on the booths was split and patched with silver duct tape. The chrome stools at the counter were loose on their bases. The jukebox, a magnificent Wurlitzer, stood silent in the corner, its colorful lights long dead. Miss Arla Graves, the night manager, was the diner's still, quiet center. She moved with a preternatural calm, her footsteps making no sound on the checkered linoleum. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight, unforgiving bun, and her uniform, a starched, pale blue waitress dress that looked like it had stepped out of a 1970s photograph, was immaculate. Her eyes, the pale, washed-out blue of a winter sky, seemed to hold the entire desolate landscape within them. They saw everything and revealed nothing. She'd hired me with a brief nod, her scrutiny more akin to a biologist observing a new specimen than an employer assessing a potential hire. On my first official night, as the sun plunged below the razor-sharp horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood and bruised purple, she approached my station by the coffee urns. In her hand, she held a small, folded piece of paper, yellowed and softened with age, stained with grease, and something that looked alarmingly like old rust. "The rules, Mr. Weaver," she said. Her voice was a mere whisper, yet it carried over the hum of the ancient refrigerator unit like a pronouncement. "They are not for negotiation. They are for continuance." I unfolded the paper. The script was neat, spidery, written in faded black ink. 3 rules. 1. Always count your customers if there are more people inside than came through the door. Don't serve anyone. A nervous tremor went through me. It sounded like the start of a bad joke, but Miss Arla's face was utterly devoid of humor. 2. Never trust customers who know your name without reading your name tag. I touched my chest instinctively. I hadn't been given a name tag. The sweet, cloying scent in the air seemed to intensify for a moment, catching in my throat. 3. When customers start screaming about seeing themselves in the windows, but their reflections show them decades older and dying. Shatter every mirror and window in the diner. They're seeing their true fate, and it's contagious through reflective surfaces. My blood ran cold. This was no small-town quirk. The specificity, the sheer, unhinged horror of that last rule. I looked up at the vast panoramic windows that lined the front of the diner, now reflecting only the deepening darkness outside. They suddenly seemed less like portals to the desert and more like polished, waiting slabs in a morgue. Any clarifications? I managed, my voice hoarse. Miss Arla merely looked at me, her gaze unwavering. The rules are clear, Mr. Weaver, as is the consequence of ignoring them. She turned and glided towards the kitchen, leaving me alone with the list. The oppressive silence and the dawning, terrifying realization that the Dead Mile Diner was more than just a stop on a lonely highway. It was a place with its own grim, unwritten laws, the distant rumble of an approaching truck. Its headlights cutting twin beams through the absolute blackness signaled the true start of my shift, and perhaps the end of everything else. The first few nights at the Dead Mile Diner were a descent into a peculiar kind of madness, a slow erosion of the rational. By day, I'd sleep fitfully in a stifling, rented trailer a few miles down a dirt track, the desert sun beating down like a blacksmith's hammer. By night, the diner became my world, a small, flickering island of questionable light in an ocean of primordial darkness. The silence out on Highway 666 was a living entity, broken only by the roar of the occasional 18-wheeler, its passage a brief, violent disruption before the oppressive quiet resettled. I tried to dismiss the rules. I told myself Miss Arla was an eccentric, the product of too many years spent in isolation. But the diner itself, it had a way of whispering otherwise. The first rule, always count your customers, became an obsession. The bell above the door would jingle. A lone trucker would amble in, order black coffee and a slice of day-old pie. One in, one served. Simple. But then there were the flickers at the edge of my vision. An extra shadow in a booth just beyond the main light. A coffee cup on a distant table that seemed to empty itself when my back was turned. Well, irasidi, how, Bishop in die off. Once, I was certain I saw 5 people seated, though only 3 had come through the door. When I looked again, heart hammering, there were only 3. Miss Arla, polishing glasses behind the counter, offered no comment, but her pale eyes seemed to miss nothing. It was on the 4th night, sometime after 2 a.m., when the desert outside was at its blackest, and the air within the diner hummed with a strange, expectant energy, that June first appeared. There was no jingle of the bell, no gust of desert air. One moment, the counter stool nearest the jukebox was empty. The next, she was there. A small girl, no older than 9, in a faded yellow nightgown, clutching a threadbare teddy bear with one button eye. Her dark hair was lank, her face pale and serious. She just sat there, swinging her small bare feet, looking directly at me. My breath hitched. I hadn't seen her come in. I knew I hadn't. Evening, I managed, my voice rough. Can I get you something, kid? She didn't answer for a long moment, just stared with those unnervingly ancient eyes. Then, she said, her voice as soft and clear as a tiny bell, "You look sad, Cal." Not Mr. Not the name I was vaguely thinking of putting on a name tag if I ever got one. Cal, the name I was running from. My blood ran cold. Rule number 2. Never trust customers who know your name without reading your name tag. How How did you know my name? I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. June tilted her head. It's written all over you, she said, simply. In the dark bits, she then turned her attention to the silent jukebox, humming a tuneless, melancholic little song. She didn't ask for anything. She just was. An unnerving, out-of-place fixture in the pre-dawn gloom. The next regular to shuffle in was Big Rick, a mountain of a man who drove a colossal Peterbilt and seemed to subsist entirely on black coffee and nicotine. His face was a roadmap of hard miles, his eyes shrewd and perpetually tired. He saw June on the stool, grunted, and then fixed me with a knowing look as I poured his coffee. New meat, huh? He rumbled, gesturing with his chin towards me. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl that smelled of stale cigarettes and diesel. Word and advise, son. This place, it ain't right, especially her. He flicked his eyes towards Miss Arla, who was meticulously wiping down an already spotless counter at the far end. She calls your name, and you ain't wearing no tag. You don't look her in the eye. You just get busy. And if you value your fillings, don't ask about the folks who used to work here before you. He took a long, noisy sip of his coffee. This stretch of 666. It chews people up and spits out ghosts. Before I could ask what he meant, June, who hadn't moved or spoken again, suddenly wasn't there. The stool was empty. No sound, no flicker. Just gone. A cold spot lingered where she'd been, the air still faintly carrying her tuneless, sad little hum. Big Rick just shook his head, downed the rest of his coffee, and tossed a crumpled bill on the counter. Keep the change, kid, he muttered. You might need it for a fast exit. He left, the bell above the door jangling with an almost mocking loudness. I had a chilling, certain feeling that his advice about a fast exit was more than just trucker bravado. The encounter with June and Big Rick's ominous warnings left an oily residue of fear on my already frayed nerves. The diner, during the long, silent hours between the graveyard shift's sparse customers, felt like a pressure cooker. The air was thick, the silence charged. I started noticing more discrepancies. A stack of menus would be on the left side of the counter 1 minute, and on the right the next, with no one having touched them. The old wall clock above the kitchen pass-through would sometimes stutter, its second hand jumping, or even, for a horrifying instant, sweeping backwards. That faint, sweet smell, the one like burnt sugar and sorrow, intensified during these moments, sometimes so strong it made my eyes water. Miss Arla remained an enigma. She moved through the diner like a ghost herself, her tasks performed with a meticulous, almost ritualistic precision. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were often laconic, yet freighted with an unspoken, unsettling significance. Once, after I jumped at a sudden clatter from the kitchen when no one was in there, she'd simply said, without looking up from polishing a coffee pot, "The diner has its settling noises, Mr. Weaver." Best not to dwell on them. It was during a particularly dead stretch, around 3:30 a.m., that I found Lenny Brace's journal. I'd been tasked by Miss Arla with cleaning out the small, cramped staff locker room at the back, a space that smelled of mildew and forgotten dreams, tucked behind a rusted, dented locker that looked like it hadn't been opened since the Truman administration. I found a beaten-up, spiral-bound notebook. The cover was stained, the pages warped, but the handwriting inside, though hurried and sometimes frantic, was clear. Property of L. Brace. "Do not touch, you vultures," was scrawled on the first page. Lenny Brace. Big Rick had mentioned him once in passing. Old Lenny. Owned this place before. Well, before Arla was the only one left. The journal was a descent into one man's private hell. Lenny had started out cheerful, optimistic about his new diner venture. Then the entries grew darker, more erratic. He wrote about the rules. Arla gave me the list today. Said if it was house policy, more like house haunting. He documented phantom customers, people who appeared and vanished, who knew things they couldn't possibly know. He wrote about June. The little girl in the nightgown was back. Asked me if I remembered her mother. I've never seen the kid before in my life. He wrote about the oppressive atmosphere, the temporal glitches. Clock ran backwards for a full minute today. Felt like I was drowning. The entries about Miss Arlo particularly chilling. Arla never seems to sleep. Never eats. Just watches. Been here since 71, she said once. Hasn't aged a day by my reckoning. What the hell is she? Lenny described trying to get answers from her, only to be met with her infuriating, placid silence, or with pronouncements that sounded like riddles from a sphinx. The later entries were filled with a mounting terror, especially concerning the third rule. Heard screaming from booth 4 last night. Man clawing at his own face, shouting about his reflection. Arla just handed him a tire iron, told him to tend to the windows. Didn't even flinch. Lenny wrote of his fear of the diner's large, panoramic windows, of catching glimpses of things in their polished surfaces that weren't there. The last entry was a single, jagged sentence, scrawled across the page. It's not just their fate you see. It's a door. The reflections are a door. Arla knows. She knows about the fourth flicker. The one that... The ink trailed off, as if his hand had been violently jerked away. I looked up, half expecting Miss Arla to be standing there, her pale eyes knowing. The locker room felt suddenly colder, the shadows deeper. Lenny Brace's ghostly ledger wasn't just a record of past horrors. It felt like a prophecy of my own. The faint, sweet smell of burned sugar was suddenly, overwhelmingly strong. Lenny's journal became my secret obsession, a terrifying travelogue of the damned. I reread his entries during lulls in the non-existent rush, his fear becoming my own. The diner was no longer just a strange workplace. It was a trap, a carefully baited snare disguised with formica and flickering neon. The fourth flicker Lenny had mentioned haunted my thoughts. What fresh hell did that entail? The atmosphere in the Dead Mile diner grew heavier with each passing night. I started seeing things, or thinking I did, fleeting images in the polished surface of the coffee machine. A pair of eyes not my own, staring back, the reflection of a hand, skeletal and gray, reaching for a sugar dispenser. I'd blink, and it would be gone, leaving me with a racing heart and the acrid taste of fear in my mouth. June appeared more frequently now, her silence more profound, her gaze more unsettlingly perceptive. She'd hum her little tune, and the diner's temporal glitches would intensify, cutlery rattling in the drawers, the radio behind the counter crackling with static that sometimes, just sometimes, sounded like whispered names. Then came the night of the third rule. A battered sedan, its engine coughing like a dying man, pulled into the gravel lot around 1 a.m. A middle-aged couple emerged, looking pale and road-weary. They looked ordinary, almost disappointingly so. They slid into a booth by the large front window, ordered black coffee and pie, their voices hushed, tired. I served them, my hands surprisingly steady, trying to ignore the cold knot of dread in my stomach. Miss Arla watched from her usual station at the end of the counter, her expression as serene and unreadable as a desert sphinx. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then the woman, Martha, let out a small, strangled gasp. She was staring at her reflection in the dark window, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. Her husband, Frank, looked at her, then at the window. His scream was a raw, tearing sound that shattered the diner's oppressive quiet. No, oh no. Martha, that's not us. Martha was clawing at her own face, her eyes wide with a primal terror. The wrinkles, Frank, the blood, my hair, it's white. I'm dying. I looked. My stomach heaved. In the dark glass, their reflections were not of a tired, middle-aged couple. Frank's reflection was ancient, skeletal, his eyes hollow sockets, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Mata's reflection was a hag, her skin like parchment stretched over a skull, her hair thin and white, her reflected lips drawn back in a rictus of agony, one hand clutching a chest that seemed to be caving in. They were watching themselves die, decades hence, in vivid, horrifying detail. Rule 3. Shatter every mirror and window. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. Miss Arla hadn't moved. Her gaze was fixed on the screaming couple, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. It wasn't cruelty. It was detached interest, expectation. "The tire iron," Miss Arla said, her voice a calm whisper in the ensuing chaos. She nodded towards the utility closet. "It's traditional, Mr. Weaver." My mind reeled. This was insane, but the couple's screams were escalating, raw, animalistic, and I saw it. A flicker in Frank's real eyes, a terrifying vacancy, as if the horror of his reflection was actively pulling something out of him. Contagious. Lenny's words. I stumbled to the closet, grabbed the heavy, rust-stained tire iron. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip it. The sound of shattering glass was deafening as I brought the iron down on the first panoramic window. Then the next. Frank and Martha were on the floor now, writhing, their screams mixing with the splintering crunch of glass. Each window I broke felt like a violation, an act of madness, but the alternative, the sight of those dying reflections, was unbearable. The air filled with the smell of ozone, dust, and that sickly sweet scent, now overwhelming. When the last large pane exploded outwards onto the gravel, a sudden unnatural silence fell. Frank and Martha lay whimpering on the floor, their eyes vacant, staring at nothing. Their horrifying reflections were gone, replaced by the jagged, empty frames looking out onto the indifferent desert night. Then, from a remaining shard of glass still clinging to one of the window frames, a new reflection shimmered. A face contorted in a silent, eternal scream, gaunt, aged beyond belief, eyes wide with unending terror. Big Rick. He was trapped in the glass, his silent scream a permanent fixture in the diner's broken visage. The sweet smell in the diner was now cloying, suffocating. Miss Arla finally moved, stepping calmly around the debris. "Clean up, Mr. Weaver," she said, her voice still a soft, undisturbed murmur. "We'll be getting more customers soon. They always come." The aftermath of the shattered windows was a landscape of jagged edges and profound, unnatural quiet. The desert wind, no longer held at bay by panes of glass, sighed through the diner, carrying with it the scent of dust, creosote, and the faint cold tang of something ancient and disturbed. Frank and Martha, the couple whose reflections had triggered the cataclysm, were gone. Not in the sense of having walked out. One moment they were huddled on the floor, whimpering. The next, as I swept up the larger shards of glass under Miss Arla's placid gaze, they had simply ceased to be there. No sound, no shimmer, just an empty space where two terrified human beings had been. It was as if the diner, or whatever force animated it, had neatly excised them from reality once their role in the horrifying spectacle was complete. Big Rick screaming, aged face, trapped in that lone shard of glass, was a constant, silent accusation from the corner of my eye. It was a stark reminder of the diner's grim power, a testament to the third rule's brutal efficacy and its terrifying implications. The reflections weren't just visions. They were traps, snares for the soul. With the windows gone, the diner felt exposed, vulnerable. But it was a vulnerability that cut both ways. The barrier between the normal desolation of Highway 666 and the diner's peculiar pocket of temporal torment had thinned. The occurrences intensified. Phantom customers were no longer fleeting shadows. They were more defined, lingering longer, their whispered conversations just at the edge of intelligibility. June appeared almost every night now, her small, pale face more sorrowful than ever. She'd sit on her stool, humming her tuneless dirge, and sometimes she'd look directly at me and say things that made my blood freeze. "He's looking for you, Cal," she whispered once, her eyes fixed on a dark corner. "The man you hurt, he's always looking." My past, the hit and run. The diner was using it, weaponizing my guilt. The sweet, cloying smell, which I now associated with the peak of the diner's malevolent energy, would grow stronger whenever my thoughts strayed to that rainy California highway. Sometimes, in the reflection of a polished coffee urn or a greasy countertop, I see not my own face, but a fleeting image of shattered headlights, of a small, crumpled bicycle. Lenny Brace's journal, with its terrified scrawls, became my only confidant. His mention of a fourth flicker, a danger beyond the 3 rules, gnawed at me. What could be worse than what I'd already witnessed? I searched the diner, desperately, in the quiet pre-dawn hours, looking for something. Another journal. A hidden room. A clue to what this fourth horror might be, or how Lenny himself had ultimately vanished. Miss Arla watched my furtive searches with that same unnerving, tranquil amusement, as if I were a mouse scurrying in a cage of her own design. "You seek understanding, Mr. Weaver," she murmured one morning, as I was fruitlessly tapping at a loose floorboard near the kitchen. Her voice, as always, was a soft, rustling whisper. "Understanding is a heavy burden in a place like this." "What is this place, Arla?" I finally snapped, the fear and frustration boiling over. "What are you?" She actually smiled then, a slow, chilling curve of her lips that held no warmth, only an ancient, weary knowledge. "This diner, Mr. Weaver, is a way station, a place of necessary reflection. For those who carry significant burdens on the devil's asphalt. For those whose accounts are overdue." "Overdue for what?" "For penance," she breathed, the sweet smell suddenly, sickeningly, strong around her. "For the balancing of scales. Highway 666 has always been a conduit for such things. It remembers every sin, every sorrow, every life cut short on its unforgiving length. The diner merely provides the stage." Her words, combined with Lenny's journal, started to paint a horrifying picture. This wasn't just a haunted, greasy spoon. It was a purgatory. A carefully managed, interactive hell where souls were forced to confront their darkest deeds. And Miss Arla, she wasn't just a manager. She was its conductor, its priestess. The fourth flicker Lenny had warned about began to manifest. It wasn't a single event, but a subtle, terrifying shift in the diner's reality. Customers, the few real ones who still brave the diner's broken facade, would sometimes freeze mid-sentence, their eyes glazing over, only to resume moments later with no memory of the lapse, perhaps ordering something they hadn't intended, or speaking in a voice that wasn't quite their own. Time itself felt more elastic, more unreliable than ever. Once, I looked at the clock, saw it read 3:15 a.m., glanced away for what felt like a second, and when I looked back it was 3:14 a.m. Then came the night. The diner decided to personalize my torment directly. A new phantom customer appeared, not subtly, but with a chilling, deliberate entrance, though the bell above the door remained silent. It was a man, his face obscured by shadow, his clothes torn and muddy, as if he'd been thrown from a wreck. He sat at the counter, directly opposite me. "Coffee," he rasped, his voice like gravel and broken glass. "Black. And tell me, Cal, was it worth it? Ruining lives? Just to save your own skin?" My heart seized. The voice, I knew that voice, or a version of it. It was distorted, filled with an unearthly resonance. But the cadence, the anger. The figure leaned forward, into the weak light from the coffee machine. The shadows on his face shifted. It was the man whose car I had hit, the father of the child. His eyes were hollow sockets, burning with a cold, accusatory light. You never even looked back, did you, Cal? The phantom hissed, a spectral hand reaching across the counter, its touch like ice. You just drove, left us there, left her there. Images flooded my mind, vivid, unbearable. The rain, the scream of tires, the sickening crunch of metal, the small, still form on the asphalt. My own reflection, wild-eyed and terrified. In the rear-view mirror, as I sped away, the diner was feeding on it, amplifying it. The sweet smell was a choking miasma. June appeared beside the phantom father, her eyes filled with an ancient sorrow. "He remembers you, Cal," she whispered. "She remembers you." Miss Arla watched from the shadows by the kitchen pass through, her face unreadable. But I thought I saw a flicker of something dark, something akin, satisfaction in her pale eyes. This wasn't just a random haunting. This was a curated torment, and I was its star attraction. The man from my past lunged, his spectral fingers closing around my throat, the cold of the grave seeping into my very bones. The Dead Mile Diner was no longer just showing me reflections of fate. It was dragging my own past out of its shallow grave and forcing it to look me in the eye. The spectral fingers around my throat were impossibly strong, chilling me to the marrow, dragging the air from my lungs. The phantom father's face, a mask of anguish and cold fury, loomed inches from mine. His hollow eyes burned with the memory of that rain-slicked California highway. A memory the diner was gleefully replaying and amplifying for my exclusive torment. The sweet, cloying scent of burnt sugar and sorrow was a suffocating blanket, thick with accusations. "You took everything," the phantom choked out, his voice a chorus of a dozen grieving whispers. June stood beside him, her small hand resting on his spectral arm, her own eyes, ancient and sad, fixed on me. My past wasn't just haunting me, it was physically assaulting me. This was Miss Arla's penance, her balancing of scales, and it was a gruesome, intimate affair. Then, through the haze of terror and asphyxiation, I saw her, Miss Arla. She hadn't moved from the shadows by the kitchen pass-through. But her expression, it was no longer unreadable. It was raw, agonizingly so. Her lips were moving, silently mouthing words along with the phantom's accusations. Tears, actual tears, traced paths down her usually impassive cheeks, and in her hand, clutched so tightly, her knuckles were white, was a small, impossibly old and faded photograph. A smiling woman, younger, her hair dark, an arm around a small child. A little boy. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, more stunning than the phantom's icy grip. The child I had killed, her son. The phantom father's grip loosened, his form flickering. He looked down at the photograph in Arla's hand, then back at her, a look of profound shared sorrow passing between them. He wasn't just my tormentor, he was hers too, or a part of her, a manifestation of her unending grief. He was just a boy, Miss Arla whispered, her voice no longer soft, but ragged, torn from a place of unimaginable pain. "My boy, my Michael." She looked at me then, her pale eyes blazing with a fury that was terrifyingly human, stripped bare of all her previous detachment. You took him from me, Cal Weaver. On that highway, you left him, on the asphalt, like refuse. The name, Mikhail. The diner hadn't just pulled forth the father. It had given voice to Arla's grief, to the name of the child whose memory had anchored her to this god-forsaken patch of desert for what must have been decades. The sweet smell in the diner suddenly shifted, losing its artificial edge, becoming the raw, unmistakable scent of profound human sorrow, so potent it was almost unbearable. The phantom father faded, leaving only the oppressive weight of Arla's gaze and the crushing truth. The rules, the phantom customers, the reflections. It was all her. Her grief, her rage, her need for a twisted, unending form of justice, somehow amplified and given power by this cursed stretch of Highway 666. The diner was her mausoleum, her torture chamber, and her stage. And I was her unwilling star. Why? Why? I choked out, my throat raw. Why all this? The rules, the others. They all carry their burdens, Mr. Weaver, Arla said, her voice regaining some of its chilling composure, though the tears still flowed. It draws them, those who run from their past, those who refuse to face their sins, like you. I merely provide the venue, the opportunity for them to serve their penance, to reflect on what they've done. Her gaze flickered to the shard of glass where Big Rick's screaming face was still trapped. Some reflections are more permanent than others. The full, horrifying weight of it settled on me. Lenny Brace, Big Rick, Frank and Martha, June, all caught in Arla's web of grief and retribution, their own guilts perhaps making them susceptible. And now me, the one who had directly caused her unending agony. What do you want from me, Arla? I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a vast, hollow emptiness. Her smile was a terrible, beautiful thing, full of pain and a dawning, awful triumph. Your shift isn't over, Mr. Weaver, she said, her voice soft again, almost gentle. It's just beginning. You get to serve them all, every soul you wronged, every memory you tried to bury. Here, forever. That will be your reflection. The diner seemed to sigh around us, a collective exhalation of all its trapped sorrows. The scent of burnt sugar returned, stronger now, almost ecstatic. From the silent jukebox, a faint, tinny melody began to play, a child's lullaby, sad and out of tune. June's song. Miss Arla slowly advanced, no longer a manager, but an angel of a very specific, very personal damnation. The lullaby from the jukebox swelled, filling the diner with its mournful, off-key notes. It was a sound that promised no comfort, only an eternity of sorrow. Miss Arla stood before me, her face a mask of terrible, righteous grief. The phantoms of the diner seemed to solidify in the shadows around her. June, her eyes ancient, the screaming, trapped face of Big Rick in the shard of glass. The faint outlines of Frank and Martha, their terror a permanent echo. And beside Arla, almost protectively, the spectral image of her son, Michael, his small hand reaching for hers. This was it, my penance, an unending shift in a purgatory of Arla's making, serving the ghosts of my past and the accumulated despair of Highway 666. There's no escape, Cal, Arla whispered, her voice now intertwined with the ghostly lullaby. Not from this place, not from what you did. But as I looked at her, at the raw, unhealed wound of her loss, something shifted within me. Not defiance, not yet, but a flicker of something other than pure, abject terror. Lenny Brace's journal, the fourth flicker, the one that, what if the diner's power, Arla's power, could be turned? What if the reflections weren't just traps, but also mirrors in the truest sense? You're trapped too, Arla, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. This place, it feeds on your pain as much as mine, as much as theirs. I gestured to the silent, watching phantoms. You haven't been managing this diner. It's been managing you. A flicker of doubt, or perhaps just surprise, crossed her face. The spectral Michael beside her seemed to waver. This isn't justice, I pressed on, emboldened by that flicker. This is just more sorrow. More ghosts for Highway 666. Your son, would he want this for you? To be this conductor of misery forever? Arla recoiled as if struck. Don't you speak of my son, she hissed, her composure cracking, the phantom figures around her intensifying. I have to, I said, my gaze locking with hers, because I took him from you. And that will be my hell, Arla, whether I'm in this diner or not. But yours doesn't have to be endless. This place, these rules, they're built on your grief. What happens if that grief changes? I didn't know what I was saying, not really. The words were just coming, fueled by a desperate, insane hope. But as I spoke, something began to happen. The oppressive sweetness in the air lessened. The ghostly lullaby from the jukebox faltered, the notes becoming discordant, then fading into static. The phantom Michael beside Arla looked not at me, but at his mother, his small, spectral face filled with an unreadable emotion. Arla stared at me, her eyes wide, conflicted. Then she looked at the image of her son. The raw fury in her face began to crumble, replaced by a look of utter, desolating heartbreak, older and deeper than the vengeance. He just wanted to see the big trucks, she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, not of rage this time, but of pure, unadulterated sorrow. And as she spoke those words, truly spoke them from the heart of her loss, rather than the heart of her revenge, the diner itself seemed shudder. The remaining shard of glass, holding Big Rick's screaming face, cracked, then shattered, his image dissolving into nothingness. June, the little girl in the nightgown, looked towards Arla, a faint, almost peaceful smile touching her lips, before she too began to fade, becoming translucent, then gone. The phantom Michael reached out a small ethereal hand and touched Arla's cheek. A look of understanding, of sorrowful release passed between them. Then he too began to dissolve, not into angry static, but into soft, fading light. Arla sank to her knees, a choked sob escaping her, the sound of a dam finally breaking after decades of holding back an ocean of grief. The oppressive atmosphere in the diner lifted, not entirely, but significantly. The air felt lighter, cleaner. I didn't know what would happen next. Would I vanish like Frank and Martha? Would I be free to walk out? Or was this just another, crueler phase of my penance? Slowly, hesitantly, I walked towards the broken front of the diner. Outside, the first pale fingers of dawn were stretching across the eastern sky, painting the desolate landscape in hues of gray and fragile rose. It was the first sunrise I had truly seen in what felt like an eternity. I looked back. Miss Arla was still kneeling, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the empty space where her son's phantom had been, her expression one of profound, exhausted peace. I stepped out onto the gravel. The desert air was cool, clean. I took a breath. Then another. Highway 666 stretched before me, empty, silent, no longer feeling actively malevolent, just old and tired. I don't know if the cycle of the Dead Mile diner was truly broken that night. I don't know if Miss Arla found her peace, or if she simply became another quiet ghost in its long, sorrowful history. I didn't stay to find out. I just started walking west, towards the rising sun, leaving the devil's asphalt behind. But sometimes late at night, when I'm alone in whatever cheap motel room I found, I'll catch a whiff of something sweet in the air, like burnt sugar and old sorrow. And when I look in the mirror, just for a fleeting second, I don't see my own reflection. I see a small, silver-haired woman, eternally polishing a countertop in a lonely diner, waiting, always waiting. And I know that some shifts, some debts are never truly over. They just change venues. Millbrook County. Its roots run deep, and its secrets are written in blood. Michael Thorne learned that some cycles can't be broken, only continued. The rules were just a script, and the performance is perennial. The Millbrook dirge may be over, but the chorus finds new voices. Seriously. If you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the terrifying final act. The twist that reveals the true, ongoing cost of living in Millbrook. The last few moments will leave you questioning who is truly in charge. What do you think the repeating is? What is the true nature of Sheriff Morrow's role? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it through the night in Millbrook County, if the past hasn't claimed you, then you're already a part of our story. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because some towns, they never let you leave. And the next performance is waiting.